that.
She had an employee in her office that was responsible for promoting her image, her publicity.
She had a publicly funded contract for this. We had records that Ms. Willis and the mayor of Atlanta were at meeting with the vice president. She became DA January 1st, 2021, but she had a transition team leading up to that. So, and Mr. Wade was in charge of her transition team. Wait, what? What's happening? He was telling me about the access cards, that Mr. Wade had access cards. So Ms. Willis had stated that it would be between $3 or $4 million to actually pay Mr. Wade completely to prosecute this case.
On the trips, how much total were the trips?
About $20,000. Subsequently, there's been a book that was published that called "Find Me the Votes," that authors had exclusive access to her. Yep.
We just put on the screen some of the
perfect.
text messages that you produced to us.
Yes.
This is from your phone.
It is,
And
so
you're talking to Terrence Bradley, I see over there on the left.
Yes, and so when you see on the 14th that one that's right in the middle that says "File attachment with MIME type," that is a picture of her. So it doesn't show up on this, but it's actually, there was a picture of
So
Miss
while
Yeardy.
you're texting, you're shooting him a picture to see if he can identify Robin Yeardy.
Yes.
Did
And
he identify her?
He did, yes. He said, yes, that's her, that's the East Point. And he thought the apartment was in East Point. I later found out it was in Hapeville, but those are very
Right.
close in close areas.
So he knew they would meet at that apartment?
He did, yes. He knew all
Okay.
about it. And it was hard to find Miss Yeardy. What happened, and she was Robin Bryant, and then she got married and was Yeardy. I did an open records request for a contract that the DA's office got. It's called Critical Mention. She has I guess he's an attorney, but he's sort of in charge of communications. His name is Jeff DeSantis. Right after Ms. Willis had opened the investigation in this case, that same week, he contracted a company called Critical Mention, which is a media monitoring company. They put a dollar figure basically on your media presence, and they give you these analytical reports. And they say, hey, you did great on MSNBC. That's $1 million worth of, stuff for your brand. The Fani Willis brand is doing well, or this phrase is doing well, things like that.
She had an employee in her office that was responsible for promoting her image, her publicity.
She had a publicly funded contract for this. So Jeff DeSantis contracted or called this company, and it's in the emails. I think I provided those as well, but contacted Critical Mention and said, we need to hire you to do media monitoring. And it was the same week that she had sent the letter to Raffensperger and Kemp about this case. Said, we need to have a contract to do media monitoring. Got $10,000 approved, paid $10,000 for a year contract for an annual contract.
Who approved that?
Jeff DeSantis' email said the county approved it, and his emails indicated that it was hard to get approved, that he had to really push, I think is what he said. There's some language to that, but the county paid for it.
Do other DAs do that?
I'd never even heard of media monitoring. I didn't even know it existed. No. It was very shocking.
Or can you confirm whether or not Ms. Willis or Mr. Wade were coordinating with the Biden White House in the course of this investigation and prosecution?
The discovery, they've got, a lot of our discovery involves the January 6th. A lot of what we have in discovery is the same stuff that other places have. So they had to have gotten it from somewhere. And they also, they read a lot of the testimony. They played testimony in the special purpose grand jury. So, I don't know how they got all of that, but they got it somehow. And then, there's one of the other things I did was I did a open records for the White House access, and we had records that Ms. Willis and the mayor of Atlanta were at meeting with the vice president.
Okay, and so this is the access history. How does that work? The White House keeps records of anybody that comes in and has any kind of official meeting for sure?
Yes, and my understanding is it's highly regulated who can access the White House, and so you have to apply in person or apply ahead of time, and then they give you a time when you make the appointment, and they give you a time when you're allowed to be in and when you have to be out by, and they track you. And that makes sense. They don't want anybody lingering in the White House, but they keep that. And so they're called WAVE records, I believe is what they're called, and I'm not sure what that's an acronym for, but they're publicly available. They're open records.
And this record that's shown on the screen shows Fani Willis was a visitor with V. POTUS. I presume that's Vice President of the United States?
Yes, it was.
And what was the date of that back in was that February sometime of 23?
February 28, 2023.
Is that before the indictment?
Yes.
Okay. Any further explanation of why Ms. Willis was meeting with the Vice President of the United States?
No. I know Dexter Bonds, and I believe that's the same one that Mr. I think it's Dickinson or Dixon, the mayor of Atlanta, was also there.
Okay. How'd you learn about this relationship between Mr. Wade? I think this has been acknowledged now by both parties, correct?
It has, yes.
It's a dispute as to when it began, but it's acknowledged that they had or I don't know if they still do, but at least had a romantic relationship.
Yes, that's
How'd
not.
you figure that out? How'd you find out?
So at first, I knew Mr. Wade and I knew Miss Willis, and a lot of people in the community were a little surprised to see Nathan, Mr. Wade handling this case. It was just, a lot of people said that, and so a lot of people were talking about that, and it was kind of surprising because it's not really, he does a lot of law practice, but this isn't what you would imagine him doing.
Did you ever see him have other billings? I mean, how do you have time to represent anybody else when he's billing, 24 hours a day to Fulton County?
He had other people working for him. Like, he had a law student working for him for a while, and then he had a first-year associate. So I'm assuming that they would probably do whatever other work he had.
Did you ever look at his calendar? Did you have access to that to see if
No.
it matched up?
No, I didn't have access to his calendar, and I didn't have access to their text messages. I mean, I was able to get get his geolocation data through subpoena, but the one thing that really struck me is if I was accused of something and I was saying I didn't do it, I would download my phone. They have a system. It's called Celebrate, and Fulton County pays for it. City of Atlanta pays for it. It's literally a system that you can hook your phone into. I have an investigator that has it, and I have my clients do it all the time. You hook your phone up, and it can find deleted text. It can find everything, and you can limit it. You can say, I only want texts with this person. So if I was being accused of having an affair with someone, and I said it didn't start until April, and someone else said it started in October, the easiest thing to do is to, download that phone. And for privacy concerns, you can file it under seal, but you could easily narrow it down and say, I want this timeline. I want all of our texts from, November 2021, and it would easily tell whether or not they were romantic in nature.
Before I leave the billing issues, did you ever compare Floyd and Cross's bills to Wade's to see if they were meeting together, like there was that meeting with teams or what? Were they billing for the same meetings as well?
So I looked at that. One thing is we don't have most of Floyd's. So Floyd has not billed in quite some time. So I didn't have his to compare, but I did look at Anna Cross's. The one day that I remember looking at was when they were in federal court to see, because so Ms. Cross was the one actually litigating in federal court. But Mr. Wade was sitting there with them at counsel table, and they both billed for that. I wanted to see if he billed for time that he was sitting in court waiting, because I know in Cobb County, for example, with appointed work, if we're sitting in court waiting, we can't bill unless we're actually doing something. Like, they won't pay for two people to sit there. And so I wanted to look at that. But they were both there in court that day. I had done some more open records. And Ms. Willis actually called Mr. Bradley when I did these open records and said, they're looking into us. And he called me because he was worried about it. And so we had a conversation, and he actually asked me, do I need a lawyer? What's going on? What are you investigating? What's the parameters of this? And we had a conversation, and I said, well, my interests are different than yours. I represent Mr. Roman, so I can't advise you. That would be a conflict. He asked if John, my husband, could, and I said, no, that's a conflict too. If you feel like you need somebody, you need to talk to someone else. At the time, that was early in September. I had court in Cobb County, and I ran into Mr. Bradley. I was in Judge Harris's courtroom. I think it was either September 11th or 13th. I checked my calendar a week or so ago, but it was one of those dates. And I was taking a plea in front of Judge Harris, and Mr. Bradley was also there. Another lawyer who ultimately represented Mr. Bradley at our hearing, B.C. Chopra, he was there in court also. And then a friend of all of ours, who's a district attorney, his name is Burt Cohen, he was taking the plea with me. And Burt and I have known each other for a long time. Terrence, BC, everybody's known each other for a long time. We were all sitting in a conference room attached to that courtroom, waiting for the pleas, chit-chatting, took the plea, went back in, and Mr. Bradley essentially went through the whole thing and said, well, this is what's really happening. I had a notepad and I took notes on all the things to ask for open records.
So what did he say was really happening when he said this is what's happening?
He said that they met at a judicial conference before. He was very specific that it was before she became DA, because that was one of the things that he couldn't remember when the judicial conference was, but he knew that it was before she became DA.
When did she become DA?
She became DA in it would have been January 2021.
Okay.
So she became DA January 1st, 2021, but she had a transition team leading up to that. So, and Mr. Wade was in charge of her transition team. So Mr. Bradley told me all of that. We met for about an hour. Said that they had been together. They met at this conference. Nathan was still married, and Mr. Bradley was upset because of what happened in the divorce. He was upset because they were still married, the Wades were still married, and he essentially just left her after meeting Miss Willis and dropping the kids off at college. So.
And Bradley was Wade's attorney in that divorce action you're talking about? Okay.
Yes, I didn't know that at the time.
But they were law partners.
They had been,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
And I actually don't know if he was still his attorney when he talked to me. I don't know if he was or not.
All right.
Because at some point, Mr. Wade represented himself, and then he hired a different lawyer. So I didn't know anything about the divorce at that time.
So Bradley did not like the way Wade had treated his wife,
He did not.
but he
did not-
represented him.
He did not like the
Okay.
way he had treated his wife. He didn't like what was happening in the divorce proceeding, yes.
Okay.
And, I remember specifically him saying, I handle my business, things like that. Like, that I don't leave my wife without alimony. Because this, and we talked about it. Miss Wade had been a stay-at-home mom for, they'd been married almost 30 years. And literally it was right after they dropped their youngest off at college that he said, move out, And so we went through, I was obviously interested in, wait, what? What's happening? Walk me through this. And so he was telling me about the access cards, that Mr. Wade had access cards, telling me about the contracts, told me about their contract, that they had that Nathan had brought them the contract for the first appearance hearings. They had a contract for that. We didn't talk about that yet. That they had the contract for the taint work, and then ultimately that Nathan was hired as the attorney on this case. That they had been dating before, and he told me, they met at hotels. He would go to her place. And I remember him saying, you need to find her bestie who they had a falling out. That's the person whose condo it was that they would meet at. And
did you later determine who that bestie was?
Yes, it was Robin Yeardy.
I did want to go into these trips. How much was the money? Go ahead. Thank you.
Was that a question? Because I'd like to respond if it is.
Yes.
Okay. I took notes because there were a couple different questions in there. So the first one, you said about how much money. So Ms. Willis had stated that it would be between $3 or $4 million to actually pay Mr. Wade completely to prosecute this case. So you'd be able to hire a number of prosecutors. Some of them do come and go, but most of the prosecutors we've seen on this case have been there since the beginning. So, unfortunately, these cases take time, so people may leave. You also asked me about that this money was delegated for this, and I just wanted to make sure that my testimony was accurate. This money was never delegated for this. The county did not ever delegate this. The county was not involved in that at all. Ms. Willis is the one that decided, and there's no budget. There's no transparency at all on this.
She does the contract with him, and I believe you showed those contracts. So in that sense, is delegated to him because that contract can end at any time. She could say, hey, the contract because he works at her pleasure.
Oh, yes.
So that contract could actually end at any time. That
Yes.
would be the point.
Yes.
On the trips, how much total were the trips?
About $20,000.
And I think it was about 17,059. But even if we say 20,000, what was the average cost of each one of those trips?
I don't know.
Well,
Unfortunately, they did not provide all of the records, so I can't tell you exactly. All I can tell you is what Mr. Wade charged on his credit cards. I can't tell you. Most of it was paid in cash, so there's no record. So I wish I could tell you, but
going by your slide, one was 3,335, one was 4,453.
which one? Hold on, I want to make sure I'm clear on each.
You had 6 trips.
Okay, but which trip are you talking? Well, you said one is 3,000 something. I want to make sure I'm clear.
Yeah, put it back up for me, please.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
So the first one, Royal Caribbean, 3,335, Aruba, 4,453. And then we see the next one, and then the next two. How would that compare? I mean, what is that so unusual for on price points as far as trips are concerned?
No, I mean, I don't think so. The Royal Caribbean, so I can tell you because I know these records really well. I mean, Royal Caribbean, I specifically kept out the money that he spent on his mom's cabin. So they had 2 cabins. His mom had a cabin. They had an oceanfront balcony. For the Bahamas, I think oceanfront balcony is probably, upper middle, but I don't know that it matters. Flew, comfort class, not unnormal for a lawyer.
Do you know what maybe the average American spends on a vacation?
Not this much.
You don't think?
No.
Have you looked?
No, I haven't, but I would imagine most of the Fulton County taxpayers would love to go on any of these trips.
Well, if you, since you speculate a lot, I could speculate and say that you did look, and that's why you didn't put it in your brief.
I did
because
not.
Forbes actually says that the average is about $3,700 that a person spends on a vacation.
For a single person or a family?
Family of 4. Well,
Okay.
at that time, they were taking 2 and 3 at the time.
That makes
so
sense.
That makes that's about
no,
normal.
hold on. I want to make sure that's clear. You said they were taking 2 or 3 at a time. All of these, I made very certain that my numbers only included the 2 of them. So the one trip that they took
But
his
it's
mother on,
2 adults.
2 adults, yes.
It's nothing extraordinary.
So you said $3,700 for a family of 4.
Right.
That does not surprise me. For families that can afford to go on vacations, does not surprise me.
So it's basically what the average American would do.
So that's
Yes.
this is half of that for 2 people. So you said $3,700 for a family of 4. This is for 2 people,
Right. It's just 2 people.
right? So
Yes.
yes.
So it wouldn't necessarily be habit. It's 2 adults. Bottom line is, it's not extravagant. It's not lavish, is it?
The law only says $100, so.
But it's not lavish.
That's one of the reasons I didn't include all the Ubers. I quite frankly didn't want to do the math, but there were a ton of Ubers on each of these trips. There was a hotel at the beginning of the Royal Bahamans. I didn't include that. I didn't want to do the math, and I also did not want to.
And how much does Ms. Willis make?
200 and something thousand a year.
So
It's in my brief.
your argument is that a person who makes $200,000 a year is actually setting up prosecutions to go on a trip that costs $3,500. That's your argument.
No, not in isolation. I mean, you're talking about in isolation.
No,
Not
I'm
in
not talking about isolation. I'm talking about what's in briefs. I don't know what else you may be speculating about. I'm just talking about what's in briefs that says this is the benefit that she got. And all I'm saying is that I got a person who's making $200,000, and the benefit that you're putting into the briefs, not what you may say that you may find elsewhere, but the benefit in the briefs is I go on a trip for $3,300, $4,400, and they have made up all these prosecutions to go on a 3-day cruise for $3,300. That's your argument. If that's your argument, that's your argument.
That's not.
That's in the brief.
That's not our argument. So we did
What else
argue
is
for
in the
about
brief?
3 hours.
What else is in the brief?
What else is in the brief?
Yes.
A lot of facts, a lot of law.
No, as far as actual financial benefit.
So the financial benefit that I put in the brief was what I could prove. I did not want to have any, as you call it, speculation. I did not want to speculate about anything else. So I did not know if Mr. Wade paid for an Uber that Miss Willis was literally sitting in at the same time. You can kind of assume, because it's from the airport to the hotel, but I did not want to speculate to that. So I didn't include those in the numbers. So the hard numbers in here are all of these numbers that are
That's
on
what's
trips.
in the brief.
Yes, the ones
Right.
that I actually had hard numbers that I knew that she had. Yes, that's in the brief.
In our business, we deal with proof, and so that's the proof that we
Exactly.
have.
That's what I
That
did.
person
Yes.
is doing all of this for that.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I
And
understand.
so what I included was what I had the actual hard proof of. And then some of it's attached to the brief. Some of it I got by subpoena. So some of it is actually exhibits that were admitted. I think I submitted to you all the certified business records from a couple different travel agencies. Those are actually admitted. And there were a lot of other receipts that I had that I did not know for sure if they were joined. And so I didn't include those. And I haven't
And
talked
you
about them
shouldn't,
today.
correct?
Exactly.
That's correct.
I 100% agree.
So this is what we're dealing with.
Yes, you're dealing with the stuff
Okay.
that's hard proof.
Correct.
You sought to disqualify Ms. Willis from serving as counsel and prosecuting Mr. Roman's case.
I did.
Okay. Can you pull up that motion? That motion was filed here in January, I think it was January 8th of 2024.
Yes.
What was your motion to disqualify based on?
It was based on a number of things, but it was based on mostly the fact that Miss Willis and Mr. Wade had a romantic relationship, and they had been traveling, and he had been paying for a lot of that travel. So there were a couple different things. She had not followed the statute. So the statute I referenced earlier, 15-18-20, said that you had to have county approval. She didn't have that. So that was one thing. There were also...
You had figured that out through your financial records?
Yes, I had figured that out through my financial records, through open records, through reviewing all the Board of County Commissioners. And I actually, to that motion, I attached, just on this issue, I actually attached a document showing how independent special counsel would normally be appointed, or I'm sorry, special counsel, because I found one where, and I think it's exhibit, let's see. It's exhibit J. I found one where Fulton County had actually been asked to approve a line item for an independent contractor agreement. And so this, I used it as an example of what normally would happen.
Was that for an attorney?
It was for an attorney.
So she's saying in pleadings now that she's not required to get county approval, but in the past, for people other than Wade, she had gotten approval?
This is actually the county attorney. So
Okay.
this document is the county attorney. I do not believe she's ever gotten approval for anybody.
Well, that would apply to Miss Willis would not be allowed to receive gifts from whom?
From anybody who was, and I actually believe I attached it as an exhibit. It's basically anybody who is doing business or seeking to do business with Fulton County. So, and it's one of
That
those.
would include Mr. Wade, obviously, then?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
And that's, that makes sense because that's one of those provisions that's supposed to, be guarding against honest services.
Like anti-kickback statute.
That's exactly what
Hire
it's based on.
somebody as a vendor and they give you gifts in exchange.
Yes. And so they require that you disclose that every year. It's signed under oath. You have to file it with Fulton County.
So what's the most they could have made?
Well, first, she couldn't have hired Mr. Wade because it violates county policy. So she would not have been able to hire Mr. Wade as an employee.
How does that violate county policy?
They have a lot of policies on nepotism, relationships, personal. There's a lot of guidelines in the county policies. So she would not have been able to hire him. It would not have been approved. And that would be something that actually did have to get approved by the county. And because of their relationship, that wouldn't happen.
So she wouldn't have been allowed to hire him because of violations of other county policies?
Yes.
He couldn't have been a direct employee of the district attorney's office?
Exactly. He could
This
not.
process circumvented those rules and ethical obligations?
Yes, it did.
Let's say it wasn't Mr. Wade.
So if it wasn't Mr. Wade and someone else, I believe most of the other prosecutors on this case make around $175,000 annually.
So using this technique that didn't obtain approval and didn't have to follow the ethical guidelines of her own office, she was able to pay him $700,000 over 2 or 3 years.
Yes, and
Way more than he would have made as an employee.
way more, and also he's able to have a private practice, which is significant because you're not able to have a private practice if you're an employee. So that's a big issue.
And so you discovered that and verified its accuracy through these credit card receipts, et cetera?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. Do either of them deny these trips occurred?
No, not at all.
So is this the impropriety, the financial impropriety of getting financial benefit from the job that he's paying for her way on these trips with money
Yes.
that she's paying him and approving?
This is what I would call undisputed. Some of the other stuff on his credit cards, it looks like there's trips to Charlotte and Florida and other things like that. But this is what we could undisputed say was with Miss Willis. So if you are hired as an assistant DA, you cannot have a private law practice also.
Do you know how many there are in Fulton County DA's office?
How many special prosecutors?
No, how many assistant district attorneys?
No, I actually opened records that, and it was declined. So we actually have a pending open records lawsuit, which I did bring. I asked for that. I asked for how many were hired, when they were fired, and they declined to give me that under the Open Records Act. So we ended up filing a lawsuit, and that's still pending.
Because it just occurs to me, I think there's certainly dozens of them.
Yes.
Maybe 100.
I think 100 would be a fair example, or a fair number based on just my knowledge of it. But there's quite a few, and if you had a certain amount of money that they spend several $1 million on these special prosecutors, that could be spent on a lot more assistant district attorneys.
And so who's refusing to produce these records to you?
The letter came from Dexter Bonds at the DA's office.
And
Dexter
that's
Bond.
why you filed a lawsuit against the DA's office to force them to comply with open records?
Yes.
Okay, that's still pending?
It is still pending.
Fulton County Superior Court?
It's Fulton County Superior Court. It's assigned to Judge Krause, I believe, and the county attorney contacted us and says they're going to be responding. So the county attorney is actually defending that lawsuit. So before I filed the motion, nobody acknowledged any relationship. So I filed the motion on January 8th, and then on Martin Luther
Yeah,
King.
walk us through that. What were the grounds why is it you feel like Fani Willis should be disqualified from continuing this prosecution?
Yeah, and so and these are things that I alleged in my initial motion that was filed on January 8th. I outlined this. My client in particular was not part of the special purpose grand jury. They did not recommend him to be indicted. He was not a subject. He wasn't part of that. So he was added on.
That's interesting, because I remember hearing that the special grand jury had recommended prosecuting like 40-something people.
They had.
He
yes.
was not even in that list of 40?
He was not.
And they didn't take, or they, as in Fani Willis, did not take the advice of her own special grand jury as to more than half the people they wanted prosecuted.
Subsequently, there's been a book that was published that called "Find Me the Votes," that authors had exclusive access to her, and so all of her theories in how to indict people and who to indict was explored in that book. So from that, I was able to learn that she cut a lot of people. I mean, I have
Was that because they cut deals with them, immunity deals, or?
some of them were that. Some of them I just don't think she wanted to bother with.
And then she added to the list, though, people that were not even recommended, or
My
at least your client.
My client, yes,
Okay.
she added him, so he was one of the ones. So there were some people, and it's publicly available in that book, like Senator Graham, Loeffler, those Perdue, those people.
They recommended prosecuting them?
Right. She had considered prosecuting them and taking them off the list. So there were a lot of people that had been on the consideration and then had been removed. I file it, and at that point, the world is shocked. I mean, shocked, because nobody had any idea. This had been hidden. This was even hidden from her father, who she had testified she talks to 10 times a day. So very few people knew about this relationship. And so they very much wanted to know who knew about it. Mr. Bradley, that next weekend, he gets some calls about, he gets a call, trying to fish to see if he's the leak, is what it was couched as. He gets a call from a gentleman named Gabe Banks, who ultimately represented Chris Campbell he filed a motion to quash against Chris Campbell, who's the law partner.
Gabe Banks' wife works for the DA's office?
Yes, he does. She does.
Works for Fani Willis?
Yes, and I've not gotten it. I've not opened records yet, but I have been told that Mr. Banks also has one of these special counsel contracts. Again, I have not opened records yet, not part of my case. But so he calls Mr. Bradley, and Mr. Bradley calls me and another friend of ours. Her name's Cindy Yeager. She's a district attorney in Cobb County, and he was upset. I talked to him. It was, I believe, a Saturday night, and I could tell he was upset by his text. I left my kids and went and talked to him because I was worried about him, and he took it as what he described to me as the first shot against the bow. That they were trying to figure out if it was him, and they were trying to silence him.
Trying
Gabe
to silence him.
Mm-hmm. And he said Gabe didn't say anything that threatened him. He just out of the blue called him, and he hadn't talked to him in quite some time. So it was out of the norm for him to call. So Mr. Banks called and told him that was asking if he was the leak. Meaning if he was my source. And Mr. Banks said that it was because he had seen a news article, and Mr. Bradley knew that wasn't the case, so he said, send me the news article. So he sent him some article that did not say he was the leak, and that put an end to it. But then the next day, Mr. Wade called Mr. Bradley's best friend and said to call, he didn't call Mr. Bradley directly, but told his friend to call Mr. Bradley and remind him of his privilege.
It's an attorney-client privilege.
Yes.
Who's the best friend? Can you tell me?
I'm not, he told me his name, and I'm not positive. I think I know who it is, but I'm not positive.
Is the state required to let you know if they've granted immunity to any witnesses that may have been utilized in the special grand jury process or in seeking the indictment?
Yes, they are. And, some of that has been given to us through discovery. Some of it has been given to us from other attorneys, the attorneys who maybe represented those parties. There was a lot of back and forth. There were a lot of, and this, I believe this was all public, that some of the state some of our state representatives, I think the governor in particular, were subpoenaed, and there was a back and forth over who could grant immunity, who had the power in that office to grant immunity, and that's something that I reviewed in my work on this motion with the DA's office, because Mr. Wade was the one that took over that power. And so the emails that were attached to a lot of the pleadings, it was interesting. It first started out that there was someone else in the DA's office who's actually an employee of the DA's office who was negotiating all of that. And then it evolved to another member of the DA's staff, and then ultimately it was Mr. Wade, and there's emails where he said, I'm the only one that can grant immunity. I'm the only one that has the power to do this. I'm in charge.
Was he engaged or involved in the special grand jury process?
Oh, very much so. He was by far the lead of it.
And do you know how many judicial districts we have in Georgia? I don't.
I do not. I could look at my open records request. So the judicial districts, there would be a district attorney for each of those. And so those are who I sent all of this.
It's over 50. I want to say 59.
It's over 50. I think it's 59, but I'm not positive.
That's what I think.
I think it's 59.
So out of those 59, you reached out to all of them to see if their district attorney's offices for each judicial circuit ever utilized a special assistant, outside counsel.
Yes.
Okay. And out of those, only 3 of them have ever done it?
Only 2.
Only 2.
Only 2 had ever done
Fulton
it.
County is one of them.
Only 2. Yes. I'm sorry. It's 3 counting Fulton County. Yeah. But the other thing that I was talking about, so this is the Cellhawk report, and heat map is just like how many times it's pinging. Heavy concentration is, you're talking a lot at this time, or you're at that location a lot. There's a lot of usage. The other thing I was talking about, just to make sure it's clear, so that's Cellhawk. Cellbrite is a different program. Cellbrite, and it's CELLEBRITE. Cellbrite is a program similar to Cellhawk, but it downloads data in the phone. So like this one is you pinging off of towers. It's geolocation.
Showing where you were.
Exactly.
At a certain time.
Cellbrite actually can get your text, your pictures, your app usage, all of that stuff. So it's one of those things that if you want, if a defendant is threatening someone by text and they delete it, they'll take their phone and hook it up to Cellbrite. Cellbrite it makes what's called a forensic copy of the phone, but you can also limit the data. So it's a very expensive program, so not a lot of people have it. So when I have my clients use it, costs a lot of money for them to have it done, but the DA's office has it. They have the software, they pay for it. You can find that in their open checkbook. The city of Atlanta police have it as well. But what you can do is you can copy cell phone. So what I had mentioned earlier is
you have to have the cell phone to do that?
You do. You have to have the cell phone.
So what, did Mr. Bradley give you all his cell phone? Or
No.
how'd you get Mr. Wade's cell phone?
So we did not get that data from Mr. Wade. So we only got the geolocation data from Mr. Wade. I do not have the power to get the text messages. I don't have that power. I would have to have a search warrant.
I see on November 5th, prepare case for pretrial 24 hours on one day. What do you make of that?
I thought it was astonishing that you didn't sleep for 24 hours. I've been to trial. I'm sorry. I've been to trial and had to work long hours, but 24 straight. But we did question him about that at the hearing, and he said that that's when it was concluded. So how he explained it was November 5th is when the work was concluded, and so he had done that work up until then, and that he only billed when it was concluded.
So you've gone back and reviewed all of the Fulton County Commission's minutes and records to see what requests were made and if there was a resolution granting the additional funding?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Was there ever a request for additional funding for a special prosecutor to pursue these election cases?
No, there wasn't, and I knew that before we got the district attorney's response, but subsequently we got a response from the district attorney's office that said, we didn't do it, we don't have to do it, I'm a constitutional officer. So their argument was, we don't have to comply with those statutes or those rules because she's saying she's a constitutional officer, so she doesn't have to get county approval. She can spend her budget however she wants.
Then why would she have gotten county approval for the other 55 attorneys?
So what I've surmised is that was because those were staff members, and so she went and asked for additional budgetary money. She needed a higher budget. So for those 55 people, she went and asked for more money because she didn't have enough money. And once she was awarded that, it's her position now that she can spend that money however she wants.
You cannot waive a conflict like that. You
No,
just couldn't. If your client is, you could not do that for your own client. If your client is actually suffering harm, as far as how the prosecution is taking place, because that's what a conflict is. Just because she says, oh, I'm doing these things, you're not going to go to your client and say, you actually have actual harm, but she said it, so we're going to still go forward. That makes absolutely no sense.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question to me. I don't know what
You
you're
don't
asking.
have a conflict if you're saying if she disclosed it, it would go away. Then there is no conflict.
No. I did not say that. I said we would not be here if that had happened.
Right,
That's
because
what I
you
said.
wouldn't claim there's a conflict.
No, because we wouldn't be here because it violates so many of the Fulton County statutes and ordinances and the state statutes that we wouldn't be here because it wouldn't have been approved.
But if she disclosed it, not the way you said it,
If
if it was disclosed, it's disclosed now. What is the conflict?
The undisputed facts, the facts that we all, your side and my side.
How is your
whoever's
client
side-
harmed? That's my question.
Hold on, I'm trying to answer your first question now. So if all the undisputed facts, if those had been in front of the Board of County Commissioners, we wouldn't be here because there would not have been a contract, because it's in contravention of law. So we would not be here. I would not be bringing a motion because who knows if my client would have been indicted. Now, I wish we could go back in time and undo that and see, but we can't. And so Mr. Wade was in the grand jury. He should not have been there. He should not have been appointed. Had the Board of County Commissioners known all of the facts of the case, he would never have been appointed to this case. So we can't now speculate as to what could have happened.
What case law do you point to prove that?
Oh, the statutes. It's
No, it's not a statute. Not Fulton County statute. I'm asking for Georgia Court of Appeals, Georgia Supreme Court. Is there any case that says that? And there's not.
No, and it's really not surprising, honestly, because can you imagine this happening? I mean, honestly,
happens.
in December, would you have imagined this happening? I think most people wouldn't
All
have.
sorts of conflicts are taken up by the Court of Appeals.
I
and
can
Supreme
tell
Court.
you, I have found some cases in other jurisdictions, but I have never found a case in Georgia where, and mind you, this only happens in Fulton County. So we're talking about Fulton County cases where there would be a special prosecutor appointed, because it's the only place that this happens. So otherwise, maybe the AG. So you're talking about a prosecutor sleeping with the person that she is appointing to do this work, paying exorbitant amount of money, not getting county approval, not filing.
Is she paying him, or is he earning the money because he's actually billing hours because he's prosecuting the case?
I don't.
He's
I wasn't
billing
there.
hours because he's prosecuting a case, correct? A
I
case that a
assume- I
grand
would
jury
hope-
indicted.
I would hope that he's billing based on work that he's doing. I don't know because I don't have proof of that, and the billing is very irregular. But I don't know, so I don't.
But I
wanna
mean, words
speculate.
do matter when we say that she's not paying him in that sense. He's earning money for a case that he's in charge of prosecuting, that a grand jury indicted, and that's where we are.
You're correct. She is not paying him. The Fulton County taxpayers are.